Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Now, on today's episode, it's going to be really important. I'm taking a deep dive into the dangerous idea of lawfare because it's an unprecedented assault that's currently going on. It's an assault on the fundamental principles of our constitutional republic. But before I get started, I want to take a minute to thank all of you who supported this podcast, who have shared this podcast, and who have engaged in the conversation with me, because the PAS report is now approaching its 500th episode. I never thought I would actually say that, and I never would have imagined how much it has grown in the last 4 years. This was supposed to be a hobby, and yet it's because of the demand out there, it's almost like a full-time gig. It's a lot of work, that's for sure. Your continued support is what keeps me and the PAS report going strong, so I want to thank you for that. And I think it's important for you to recognize that you're what drives this show. It's not me. It's actually you. So I appreciate everything you do. Please, as always, share this episode with your family and friends and on social media, and visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. Now, before I get to the main topic of lawfare, there are a lot of things going on this week. I mean, this is a really busy week. You had Super Tuesday. Obviously, Biden has locked up the Democrat primary. I mean, I don't think there were any questions about that. And it looks like Trump is either very close or about to clinch, and he's going to lock up the Republican primary. There's no surprise there. However, this is a very unpredictable election cycle, right? There are so many different variables. We can't be like, oh, let's compare this to the John F. Kennedy, Richard Nixon race, or let's compare this to the John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson race. There are so many variables in this race that nobody could predict what's going to happen. Nobody could predict how many different twists and turns that we're going to see, particularly with everything going on, including the lawfare that I'm going to be speaking about. I mean, it really is amazing. And what's kind of scary out there is that elections are usually pretty easy to predict. And at a dire time like this in American history, you kind of want certainty. But there are so many unknown quantities. Like, is anyone going to be surprised, even though Joe Biden has the nomination for the Democrats, is anyone going to be surprised if we see a last-minute substitution when it comes to the former president? Does anyone really know what's going to happen? Not what you want to happen, not what you hope to happen, but what's really going to happen. What type of role is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. going to play in this endeavor? You know, if he takes 18 to 19, maybe 20% of the vote like Ross Perot did, how does that change the dynamics? Or what about Cornel West? You know, nobody really talks about Cornel West, but we just saw last week over 100,000 people registered votes of no confidence in President Biden in the Democrat caucus. So can Cornel West garner those votes instead? And would that change? Would that give it the state of Michigan to Trump? Who knows? We can't predict these things. Then you have the president that is giving the State of the Union address Thursday. So everyone should tune in. Okay, whenever a president speaks, I don't care if you like a president or not. I don't care if you agree with them on the issues or not. When a president speaks, you listen. Now, I despise the State of the Union address. Whether it's a Republican or Democrat, it doesn't really matter. I despise it. And the reason that I despise it is because it's all a show. Let's be honest about that. It's not like anything of substance is going to be really discussed. We really need to go back to the old ways where the president would just write a letter to Congress and then it would be read on the floor of a joint session of Congress. Now it's this whole pomp and circumstances with the advent of TV. And when we're examining the State of the Union address, Republican or Democrat again, I've never heard a president come out there and be like, oh, you know, we're in dire straits. We're screwed. We got a lot of problems. They always say how strong the country is, how strong the State of the Union is. But right now it's not. We have to be honest. We're at our weakest point in modern history. I've never seen it like this in my lifetime, that's for sure. And then the president goes through a litany of stuff they did the previous year, and the president never looks at their policies and says, wow, I shouldn't have pushed that policy. That was a really bad idea. They always make it like their policies are the best thing since sliced bread. Then you have them proposing what they want for the upcoming year. And 99% of that stuff is never going to get done. It's all pie in the sky, superficial BS. They'll be lucky if they can get one thing done out of all the litany of line items that they want. So it's kind of useless. I mean, I'm sick and tired of presidents coming out there saying that they want to cure cancer. Yeah, that's great. I hope we do find a cure for cancer. But you're wasting people's time. And then you have the idiots in the audience that clap after every line, making the speech about 30 minutes longer than it should. First of all, Congress passed a law. No State of the Union address could be longer than 20 minutes. You can't give any applause. You could only applaud the president at the beginning and when the president's done with the speech. But again, they're going to sit there. Democrats will stand up and clap after every line. Republicans will sit there looking miserable. Again, you could just change the presidents around. It's the same thing on both sides. I'm not, criticizing one side over the other. This is what we see. And then the president's going to get into, Sally from Ohio came to me and said that nobody cares about Sally from Ohio, but they'll tell it to make people feel good, whatever. Okay, but nothing really gets said at these speeches of real substance, And that's my problem with the State of the Union address. It's not really about substance. However, with that being said, I do have to say that this is the most important speech of President Biden's political career. There is a lot of whispers out there about Biden's health, and we all see what we see on the television screen. There's absolutely no denying it. And it doesn't matter what people like me think. It doesn't matter what conservatives or Republicans. It doesn't even matter what independents think. What matters is what Democrats think. And we're seeing the polls, right? Between 60 to 70% of Democrats don't believe Joe Biden can serve a second term. They don't believe that he has enough gas in the tank. I mean, let's face it. Biden's not like fine wine. He's not going to age any better. In fact, it's only going to get worse. Now, if President Biden can go out there and execute a flawless speech and not make any mistakes, well, then he could tamp down all the talk. He won't be able to tamp it down much because we still have all the speeches that he's already given, the speeches he's going to give going forward, tripping over, stumbling over himself, stumbling onto Air Force One. But it will quiet the noise down in the Democrat circles. However, if he screws up, if he loses his place and just stares blankly into the camera or just starts, talking gibberish or starts yelling into the mic and then whispering into the mic, that creepy thing he does, well, it's going to get much worse for President Biden. And so pay attention to the speech, not necessarily the substance of it, because there won't be much. It's a State of the Union address, there never is. But pay attention, because this speech can have a lasting ramification on this election cycle. Now, when we get back from this break, I'm going to talk about this idea of lawfare. A couple people emailed me last week, and they keep on hearing the term lawfare, and they want to know what it's really about, what it actually means. So I'm going to go in depth in this. Everyone hang tight. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back, everyone. So there's a lot at stake in America. Our lives, our community, the future of our country is at stake. I mean, this is one of the most important election cycles, the most important election cycle of my lifetime. And I know we say this every single election cycle. I know, I get it. But it really is this time. I swear. I mean, we have to sit there and ask ourselves, should we return to the core principles, the core American principles that made this country great? The principles of limited government, fiscal responsibility, liberty, and freedom, the things that are actually worth fighting for in life. Do we want to restore a government by the people and for the people? Because a government by the people and for the people, it's essential to our future survival. One in which our children can inherit the same America that we once knew. One where we may have disagreed on policy issues. I mean, disagreement has always been part of the American fabric. Division has always been part of the American fabric. But we understood that we were all Americans. We understood that we're all in this together. And we also understood the things that actually unified us. Now, because of a broken education system, we no longer have that unification part, and that's where the danger comes in. But remember, a short time ago, it wasn't that long ago, 30, 40 years. Now, some will argue, well, no, it was way before that. You look at FDR, you look at Woodrow Wilson, it was actually before that. But when we're looking at modern times, there was a point in America where our officials actually respected the people they served. Our officials didn't let their own political ideology, where they stood on the issues, infect their work. And we've witnessed an erosion of this America over the last few decades, where those in positions of power seek to serve themselves. as opposed to the people that put them in those positions, where those in the bureaucracy believe that they are rulers rather than public servants. And you have those who would begin to weaponize all aspects of government to push an ideological agenda or to pursue power. That's where we stand today. On Monday, I spoke with investigative journalist Steve Baker, whom the feds arrested last Friday. And anyone who hasn't listened to that episode, I suggest you do, because it is revealing. They don't like him. They didn't like his reporting. Our institutions, particularly the FBI, didn't like that his reporting was embarrassing the FBI. They didn't like it. And so he became a target. And that's the focus. The focus currently is lawfare. Lawfare that is being used to target any dissenting voices, to target political opponents, particularly the former president of the United States. When it comes to lawfare, it's a term that's being increasingly thrown around. However, you need to know what it really means, and it's actually simple to understand. It's the weaponization of the legal system for political gain. Simple. It's the manipulation of courts, lawsuits, and legal processes to target and harass political opponents, to instill fear and silence dissent, to advance a particular agenda. And make no mistake, lawfare poses a grave threat to the very fabric of this constitutional republic. And there are two tracks to this. There's the ideological one, where you have the leftists who have weaponized and corrupted our institutions to push their ideology on everyone else. And I'm not just talking about government institutions. I'm talking about NGOs, the nonprofits. I'm talking about the media industrial complex. I'm talking about our schools. I'm talking about just about every sector you could imagine. So you have the leftists that have infiltrated all aspects of society. On the other side of the spectrum, you have bureaucrats in position of power who have come to believe that they are our rulers. See, we have to recognize that not all bureaucrats are these ideological leftists. We have to distinguish between the two. However, there is commonality between both these groups. There is some overlap because they use the same means, and both will end in tyranny. That I could guarantee. Now, when we look at lawfare, obviously the easiest example on the history of planet Earth is what's going on with the former president of the United States. Now, I get it. People don't like him. People love him, right? There's some that suffer from Trump derangement syndrome that are out of their friggin' minds. There are others who could care less. Trump could do whatever he wants. They'll still love him. But we cannot deny, no matter what your emotions are, no matter how you feel about the former president, we cannot deny the relentless assault that we've been witnessing since before he even took office. And think about it. Now, I know some of the leftists out there, they're going to scream and be like, you're just part of the Cult 45 team. You're a cult member, blah, blah, blah. But understand that even before he actually became president, there were already a barrage of legal attacks aimed at delegitimizing his presidency. I mean, even before the inauguration, you had the media acolytes. You had former bureaucrats that were in the system, that were in positions of power, talking about how he could be immediately impeached, trying to get rid of him. You had the undermining throughout his entire administration. So you look at Russian collusion prior to him being inaugurated, then during, throughout his administration, constantly there. You have the two impeachments where they tried to remove him from power. You had baseless accusations of collusion with foreign governments, dubious tax investigations, impeachment proceedings. The left has weaponized the legal system in a relentless campaign to destroy Trump and Trump supporters. Many within the bureaucracy also saw Trump as a threat. So again, they're not all ideological leftists. We need to recognize that. But many saw Trump as a threat because he disrupted the status quo. And when you disrupt the status quo, you become a target. Remember what Senator Schumer said. You cannot criticize our intelligence agencies. You cannot attack them. If you attack our intelligence agencies, is almost a direct verbatim quote, you are being really stupid. They have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. Now that's the Senate Majority Leader. At the time he was the Minority Leader, but now he's the Senate Majority Leader. So you see how dangerous this is. And now they've ramped up the lawfare because they want to prevent a second Trump term. That's what it's all about. And it's clear that they're going to stop at nothing to make this a reality. Now, luckily, one of the aspects of their lawfare didn't pan out. It was the Colorado kicking him off the ballot. The Supreme Court ruled in an overwhelming decision. 9-0 decision. So that includes the liberal justices. Although now the liberal justices are being accused of being in the MAGA cult. That's how deranged the lunatics are in MSNBC and CNN. That Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, and Justice Jackson are really MAGA cult members. These people are delusional. But the Supreme Court issued their ruling stating that the state of Colorado does not have a right to just kick someone off the ballot that's running for president of the United States. They don't get to make a determination for all 49 states, and they're not the ones that get to establish whether or not an insurrection happened. And that was the correct decision. I mean, not for nothing. But first of all, it's clear in the Constitution. You know, the same ones that constantly preach about threats to democracy. The Constitution they despise. They're now slamming the Supreme Court of the United States, saying they're nothing more than a pawn to Trump. Yeah, because I could assure you Justice Roberts loves former President Trump. He's always wearing his Make America Great Again cap. But when we look at it, the 14th Amendment is clear. It states it clearly that 2/3 of Congress have to vote to void someone off a federal ballot. That's Congress's job. Not one person from the state of Colorado or Illinois or Maine or any other state. Not a Supreme Court, state Supreme Courts. Nope, it's Congress. And then we look at the idea of insurrection, and this is what makes me really aggravated. Because when we look at January 6th, the insurrection that took place, over 1,200 individuals have been arrested. Over 1,200. How many of them were charged with insurrection? Oh, not a single one. Most of them were misdemeanor charges of trespassing, not being allowed on congressional grounds. Not a single person charged with insurrection, but even more importantly, in all the charging documents and all the court filings by prosecutors, how do they refer to January 6th? How many times have they referred in their court filings, in all the documents, the tens of thousands of pages of documents, how many times did they mention an insurrection? And that's the amazing part. The answer is pretty much zero. In the court filings, they all reference January 6th as a violent riot. That's what they reference it as. They don't reference it as an insurrection. However, that doesn't matter, because guess what? These people, they don't like a free country. They don't like the idea of a constitutional republic. And it's why they're willing to throw it all out the window. It's why they would stop at nothing to prevent Trump from getting a second term. And that's where we stand. Lawfare is a dangerous weapon in political warfare, I can tell you that. It undermines the rule of law. And when you're weaponizing legal processes for political gains, the very concept of justice becomes tainted. We already see the erosion of public trust in our institutions, all of our institutions, whether it's the CDC and all their nonsense with COVID, whether it's the NIH and COVID, whether it's the FBI, whether it's DHS, no matter what agency you're looking at, public trust has eroded in our federal institutions. And why? Well, because our institutions are corrupted. They're sowing discord and division within our society among the populace. Just think about how the FBI wanted to target Catholics. Why? Well, because Catholics don't comport to a certain type of narrative. At least traditional Catholics don't. Because traditional Catholics may believe in the idea of gender, that there are men and there are women, and you can't change that. That's the way God created us. There are many Catholics that are pro-life. It used to be that pro-life was an acceptable political position. But now, if you're pro-life, well, you're against a woman's health care. You're against women. You hate women. When it comes to parents at school board meetings that are raising concerns about what their children are being taught, well, they're homophobic, they're bigots, they're racist, they're totalitarians, because they don't have a right to have a say in their child's education. You know, it really is bizarre. People will be like, oh, well, they're not the teachers. They're not the experts in the field. First of all, there's no experts, okay? The idea that we have these so-called experts, Fauci was considered an expert. How well did that work out for everyone? The idea that just because someone's in the classroom makes them an expert is an absolute farce. The idea because someone works at a board of education or someone works at the state board of regents, or at least in New York State, it's the board of regents, that doesn't make them an expert in education. And they're saying that parents have no right because they don't understand teaching. Well, then I can make the argument that if you don't have children, you have no right to even be in the education system. How's about them apples? Okay, this is how stupid they are, that they don't even understand the logic that they use and how the logic could be used against them. But they don't care. They don't care. And I think that's the scary part. See, they're willing to use every tool in the book to destroy political opposition and silence dissent. They're so short-sighted that they don't realize that lawfare sets a very dangerous precedent for future administrations. And if it becomes acceptable to use the legal system as a tool to persecute political opponents, well, where does it end? And what happens when the shoe is on the other foot? They're not going to like it because they destroyed the safeguards that were in place to prevent the abuse of power and protect the rights of all Americans, regardless of where Americans stood ideologically. And the dangers of this lawfare extend far beyond the realm of partisan politics, and I'll explain that when I get back from this quick break. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, I talked about the dangers extending far beyond partisan politics, and I do have to explain that these lawfare strikes at the heart of our constitutional republic. It threatens the very principles upon which our entire nation was founded. The founding fathers designed a system of government with checks and balances for a reason. They designed a system with separation of powers, respect for individual rights, precisely to prevent these kinds of abuses that we're witnessing today. And nearly half the country is okay with the lawfare. They're okay with the justice system being weaponized, as long as it's weaponized against those people that they disagree with politically. And in the face of relentless attacks from those who seek to weaponize the law for their own ends, our constitutional republic, the safeguards that were built into the system, well, they're starting to buckle. We need to begin to combat the scourge of lawfare, defend the principles of our republic. And we need to ensure that the rule of law prevails over political expediency. That's why I was so happy that the Supreme Court ruled 9-0. It wasn't the 6-3 decision or a 5-4 decision. It was unanimous. These are the type of measures that actively combat lawfare. And yet the Democrats still seek to undermine it. They try and discredit the Supreme Court of the United States. They say that the Supreme Court's decision, well, it was a bad decision and it shouldn't be followed. Should just be ignored. And this President Biden, has a history of ignoring Supreme Court decisions. Whether it was the mortgage moratorium that he was warned about by the Supreme Court saying it was unconstitutional and he did it anyway because he knew that by the time he got to the Supreme Court, the moratorium would have expired, so it would have been moot. Whether it's the student loans, where the Supreme Court ruled that the president does not have the authority to cancel any student loan debt and use taxpayer dollars, your dollars, to pay off other people's student loans. And what did President Biden say just last week? Well, he doesn't care. He knows the Supreme Court ruled against him, but he's going to do another backdoor attempt. So we have to solve this problem. And first and foremost, we have to restore trust in our legal institutions. We need more judges to stand up. And I'm not talking about conservative judges. I'm not talking about liberal judges. Judges shouldn't have an ideology. Judges should be trained solely in the rule of law. What is justice? That's what they should be trained in. And if a judge wants to identify as a Democrat in their own personal life, that's on them. If they want to identify as a Republican in their own personal life, that's on them. But I wish that more judges that came from the Democrat side of the aisle would have an ounce of integrity and say, listen, I may not like the man. I may not like President Trump, but this goes too far. This threatens the system and throws out these cases against the former president. That would send a powerful message. The judicial branch actually has the opportunity to restore some trust in the system, to restore credibility. We also have to prioritize transparency and accountability within the system. We have to hold these judges accountable. You know, when you look at the judge in the Trump civil case, $450 million judgment, $450 million judgment, trying to take his businesses away from him in a case, in a never tested before legal case. The New York state law was never used in this way. It would never, ever be able to be brought in any other state besides New York. And yet that's exactly what Attorney General Letitia James did. That's exactly what this judge did. It's disgraceful. And I wish an appeals court would step in and say, this is nonsense. Knock it off. And they should call for the sanctioning of the judge. Letitia James should also face repercussions as Attorney General of the United States. Now, not only is she going after Trump, now she wants to go after meat producers for what they contribute to carbon emissions. Now, how many private flights has Letitia James taken all over this country and out of the country on the taxpayer dime? Private flights. Can we sue her for contributing to carbon emissions? These people are ideological, But even worse, they're actually incompetent. They're not smart people. You look at Fannie Willis down in Georgia, someone who should have a law license revoked immediately, someone who should be charged with perjury immediately. We actually have concrete evidence, okay? Cell phone records don't lie. No matter what Fannie Willis's boyfriend tells you, cell phone records don't lie. It gets recorded when you call a number. The amount of time you're on the phone call is recorded. They're not going to make that up. I don't think the phone company cares about Fannie Willis's sex life. And when you openly lie to a court, you or I get hit with perjury, we're going to be going to jail or paying enormous fines or having probation. Well, the same thing should hold true with a district attorney that has weaponized her office, only it should be worse. Because not only did she weaponize her office and lie, commit perjury, but it's also malicious prosecution. These people have to be held accountable. Accountability is so important to the system, and I say it day in and day out when it comes to the bureaucracy. It holds true whether we're talking about the executive branch, legislative branch, or judicial branch. Without accountability, this will continue. We need to have increased oversight. We need judicial reforms. We need to root out the corruption and the bias that exists. Another aspect to fix this problem is to actually promote a civic education, something that we do a horrible job of here in the United States. People need to understand the importance of an independent judiciary, regardless of whether or not they like the decisions that are being rendered. Listen, I completely disagreed with Justice Roberts when he was the deciding vote on the Affordable Care Act. The federal government, the Obama administration, was not arguing that this was a tax. And yet Justice Roberts concluded that, well, since it's a tax, the House passed it and it's fine. It's constitutional. But I didn't sit there and undermine the judicial branch for this, even though I disagreed with him. The judiciary has to resist political manipulation, and it's not always easy, right? I mean, we saw what happened in the Dobbs decision, where you had wackadoos outside of justices' homes trying to instill fear when the case leaked out, when the decision leaked out before it was officially announced. And then you had Democrats actually encouraging a lot of these protests at the justices' homes. You had Merrick Garland not doing a damn thing. Every single one of these people could have been arrested and made an example of. But he did nothing because he didn't care. He didn't care. That's why. There are so many useless hacks that have infiltrated our government. It's truly amazing. The threat posed by these people, the threat posed by the lawfare that's currently taking place to our constitutional republic, it's real, it's urgent. I don't think people get it. Now, the good news is it appears that the lawfare is backfiring, that Democrats are losing control of the lawfare that they started, and that would be a great thing, but we still have to be vigilant. Even if all these efforts against people like Steve Baker, investigative journalist Steve Baker, like former President Trump, if the efforts against parents and the efforts against traditional Catholics, even if these efforts fail, we have to remain vigilant. We can never let this happen again. Republicans better smarten up. They better start cutting the bureaucracy down. They better start defunding it. They better get the fiscal house in order. Too many of them are complacent. Too many of them are just waiting for things to go back to normal. Things won't go back to normal. They'll only get worse. And Republicans need to understand that realization. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please give the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating, take 30 seconds to write a review, and share this episode with your family and friends and on social media. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.